to welcome everyone for joining Ensign today during our Diversity Unlocks Innovation Campaign speaker series. It is an honor for me to introduce our guest speaker. But before, I just want to just explain a little bit about what our Diversity Unlocks Innovation Campaign is all about. So diversity of thought, experience, and background, it drives innovation. So building a diverse network of problem solvers sourced from underrepresented and non-traditional DoD participant communities is a key characteristic of our approach. The work that we do here at Ensign and seeking out talent where it lives is central to our contribution to the important work of expanding and diversifying the national security innovation base. So with that said, I'd like to introduce Mr. Farooq Mitha as our guest speaker today. Mr. Mitha currently serves in the Biden administration as the Director of Department of Defense Office of Small Business Programs. As director, he oversees more than 140 billion in annual awards to small business. In addition, he assists the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretaries of Military Departments, Undersecretaries of Defense, Directors of Defense Agencies and Major Commands, including small business planning, into the readiness of the department. These efforts aim to modernize and restore the nation's industrial commons through focusing on advancing manufacturing, applied research, and innovative programs that all align small business capabilities with the DoD's current and future needs. I know that your office is committed to inclusion, and not just because it's written on your website, but also to note, in 2020, 45% of DoD's small business awards went to disadvantaged and women-owned businesses. So just a couple of really quick things to note. We are recording today's speaker series, and if you have questions, please feel welcome to post them in the chat. So with that, Mr. Mitha, thank you for joining.
Yeah, thank you, Karen, for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm really glad to see Ensign doing these types of events for Black History Month, and also just to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion, specifically within our industrial base that supports national security. I think it's really, really important, and I'm glad to be here and to talk. And I'm not going to talk you to death. I'll probably speak for a few minutes, and then we'll love to have some dialogue with everyone. Like Karen said, I'm the Director of Small Business Programs at DoD, and I just crossed my 1-year anniversary last week of being in this job. And what's interesting is when President Biden was inaugurated, this job was considered a day, although I started a little bit after the inauguration, it was considered to be a day one hire by the administration. And I've been in this space for about 10 years, but I also talked to some of the folks in my office, my staff that have been around longer, and that's never happened before. Usually this job is something that's filled, we'll fill it 6 months later or a year later, we'll get around to it. But the president really was serious about, or is serious about, the importance of increasing small business participation. He's really serious about taking really tangible steps to increasing diversity in our supply chains. And really what he has said, which is using the procurement purchasing power of the federal government to help create generational wealth in underserved communities that may not have had a fair shake in competing for contracts with the federal government. My office is responsible for the DoD part of all that. And just a little bit about my office and what we do. We're responsible for all the small business outreach programs, policy, workforce within our acquisition system, which means that my office sits in the office of the Secretary of Defense, but we have small business offices that are scattered in every military department and every defense agency. And we have 750 members of our acquisition workforce who are small business specialists, and they work day in and out to do market research, to look for opportunities for small business set-asides, to look for innovations from SBIR and other programs that we can transition and infuse into our defense systems. So it's a big portfolio that's responsible for a lot. I mean, we spent last fiscal year alone $83 billion on small business prime contracts. And that's only prime contracts. If you add in the subcontracting industrial base, which we're also responsible for, that's where you get the big number that Karen said earlier. So there's a lot happening in this area. And there's a lot happening right now with this administration. You've probably seen, or maybe you haven't, but there are many executive orders the president has signed out related to competition, related to supply chains, related to advancing racial equity. And each of these has a major small business component to it. And there's many more that I haven't even mentioned. Those are just the three that probably are the most popularly known. But we're involved in all those things. And it's because there is a genuine understanding and desire from this administration to increase those opportunities. Just a couple of things on what we've been doing. One is the president, when he spoke in Tulsa, Oklahoma last year, talked about increasing goals. And to me, goals are important. Yes, we need to go towards them, but we're really looking at this at DoD from a capability perspective. But we have a goal for small disadvantaged businesses, which is statutory, which is 5%. The president has said we want to increase that to 15% by 2025. So this fiscal year, our goal federal government wide is 11%. That means we've got to spend an extra, I don't know, $3 billion or so at DoD on small disadvantaged businesses to meet that goal. But it creates really great opportunities for offices like mine, for programs like Ensign, other programs like SBIR, the Mentor Protege program, to really do a deep dive and say, hey, we're establishing a baseline for how we're doing business with underserved communities. And we're going to set higher goals and metrics for ourselves. That's part of the response that we're working on to this executive order to the White House in terms of what we're going to do. But every year we're going to be doing more. And every year the White House is going to look to find other ways to increase other goals and help us do more. And DoD obviously is the biggest spender in the federal government, has a big, gigantic role to play there. The other thing that I saw when I first came into this job a year ago was that our Mentor Protege program was zeroed out by leadership that came before me. And what that means is that's one program that's funded about between $30 and $45 million a year to specifically help disadvantaged and socioeconomic small businesses get to developmental assistance to then become part of the supply chain was gone. Congress wanted it, but the department said, in previous leadership said, we don't see value in this. I started, and the first thing that I did was get that money put back into the president's budget as part of our relook of the 22 budget, and we did it. And now that program is there, it's stable. We're going to make it successful. And look, the numbers don't lie. The protege companies that have come out of that program contribute over $3 billion a year to defense procurements as primes. So the program's been successful and it's created a lot of opportunities for a lot of people. We want to do more with it. We want to make it better. Another thing that I did really early on when I started in this job was I signed an MOU with Ensign at the time. And I did that because I see that there is a natural synergy between the work that Ensign does with entrepreneurs, innovators, and new entrants, and my office's ability to help those companies become joined with a successful company as a mentor and get more developmental assistance. So I'm looking forward to continuing to work with Karen and others at Ensign on how we can make that better and create a seamless pathway to get these companies involved and get them to be part of our supply chain. There's another really issue in the weeds that affected a lot of small businesses. And I'm not sure how many of you are currently DoD contractors, but there were some policies within what we call category management, which made it really difficult for our workforce to feel like they could reach companies from our socioeconomic groups and compete contracts with them while they're being scored from OMB on metrics that didn't quite involve that. So there's the view of some conflicting policies, a view. And we clarified those things. And we basically have said that any award that goes to a certified small business, whether you're SDVOSB, woman-owned, Hub Zone, 8A, you'll get credit for the other policy under category management that we're scoring agencies on. So we've been doing a lot of work on this front to really help create more opportunities for competition, to make sure that we're enabling underserved communities and businesses from socioeconomic groups to get a fair shake, to get an opportunity to compete. But look, a lot of that comes back down to the data that we have. If we don't have all the right data on the government side, we can't even find those companies. So one of my other priorities of what I'm doing right now is I'm building market intelligence tools for our small business and acquisition workforce. So when they are sitting in the early stages of planning a requirement, they can actually get the company data to see who's out there, who's able to do this work. So we can set it aside for a small business competition or a competition within a socioeconomic group. That's important because there's actually a regulation that's called the rule of two. I'm not sure if you've heard about it or not, but the rule of two basically says, if we do the market research and we see that two or more small businesses are capable and able to do the work, we must set that opportunity aside for small business competition. I want to make sure that that's enforced and followed consistently throughout the department, but we can't do that without the market intelligence. That's another big priority of mine. You're going to see in the coming couple of months, we are rolling out a department-wide small business strategy, which is going to really have a department-wide approach of how we address all of these issues. And I'll tell you that one of the first things that I saw, and I was previously under the Obama administration in this office, but in a different role, in a special assistant role. But between then and now, about 10 years have gone by, and our small business supplier base at the prime level has gone down by 43%. That is a gigantic decrease in my view. And we need to reverse that. And our small business strategy is going to get at very specific tactics, and it's going to come with an implementation plan of how we're going to do that. Now, this is not about, we just want to increase the number of small businesses just for the heck of it. No, it's not about that. It's about capability. It's about ensuring that we're not reliant on very few sources for capabilities. It's about ensuring that we're not reliant on foreign adversarial sources for capabilities. And these are big economic and national security risks. But for those of you who are working with Ensign and part of the Ensign network, it's really important for you to support us. We need these companies. We need to have the innovation. We need to bring in the commercial technologies. We need the best and the brightest minds from all of our communities to contribute to this national security mission. But it starts with the entrepreneur. It starts with the inventor, and it starts with programs like Ensign providing opportunities to get them in the door and then hand them off to people like me that are all across the department so we can actually tap into all of this talent. I can go on and on about workforce development, the importance of that. And obviously that's another big lift, and I know Ensign does some work there. I will say, just in closing, because I want to make sure we have time for dialogue, we have a lot of authorities at DoD, and we have a lot of programs that do a lot of really great work. One of my priorities through our small business strategy is to say, hey, how do we coordinate better and break down the stovepipes between these programs so we can create a really easy model for industry to follow, where you can come in through a hackathon, maybe an Ensign pitch event, and then you go from there to winning an SBIR award, and then you go from there to being a protege to a mentor in my office, and then you go from there to being a supplier to as a prime or as part of the supply chain of a large prime. We have to make that easy. Right now it's complicated. There's 20 different websites. There's 10 different entry points. So we're really looking at how we can improve our management, our governance, our entry points to make it simple and easy, and to reduce barriers to entry. I know I said I was going to stop, but I actually thought of a couple more things I should mention. One is my office has stood up a free program to help companies become more cyber ready. It's called Project Spectrum. And the website is projectspectrum.io. And there's been a lot of talk about CMMC. If you're all, maybe some of you are familiar with the cyber readiness policy, you probably saw last year we rolled out another version of that, which is going to go through the rulemaking process, and it's going to be way simpler for small businesses. But the reality is that we have to still protect our networks. And my responsibility as the director of small business is to do what I call helping companies get DIB ready. So we set up this website called Project Spectrum. You can go and sign up, and for free, you can get training, you can get tool assessments, you can do your own self-assessments with your own customized dashboard for your company, and you can see how far along you are in your compliance journey, both in comparison to the current NIST standard and also to the future CMMC standard. We're saving companies thousands of dollars by doing this. And I want to make sure that wherever I go, I'm talking about it, because we need you, but we have to make it easy for you. This is one thing that I have done to try to make it easier for small companies. The last thing is, and this is really the last thing, we also have these entities called PTACs. You may or may not be familiar with them, the Procurement Technical Assistance Centers. Right now, they reside under the Defense Logistics Agency, but Congress required the PTACs to be moved under my office because essentially they wanted to see more synergies between what all of big DoD was doing and these 96 centers that we have around the country that we fund to help small companies get ready to do business with us. So in the future, as soon as that realignment happens, we're starting some of it now, you will see more synergy with them. They will be, for me, my eyes and ears on the ground all across the country. And we're going to leverage them to help us do market research. We're going to leverage them to push out trainings like the content we have on Project Spectrum. And we're going to let you leverage them to communicate what big concerns we have that industry should be aware of. One of those is the FOCI, foreign ownership, control, and investment risk that small businesses face every day from other nations, many of whom are our adversaries. We want to make sure that we're training these companies and educating them on what these risks are, what they should be looking out for, and how they can work with us to get more ready. So when they get a phase 1 SBIR, for example, before they get the phase 2, there's no concern from the government side or from their side about FOCI type issues. So that's something that I've just started to scratch on, but it's something that's a big priority of mine, and you'll probably see more in the coming months about that. But I'm very, very concerned about the security risks that our small businesses are facing. And quite frankly, I think it's because many of them don't know. Many companies are really doing great work, but they just don't know what they should be looking out for and what they should be concerned about. So I want to make sure that we communicate that effectively. So I'll stop there for real now, and definitely look forward to having a good conversation with all of you.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Very informative. I know CMMC has been a really big challenge for a lot of small businesses. So really glad that you are taking that into another direction to make sure that it's equal access for all and help for those who need it. So I have a couple of questions for you in the chat. And first question is from David Schiff. He is internal here to Ensign. He says, David, you actually could just say it yourself.
I can.
Awesome.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for being here. It's really great to have your insight and kind of the awareness at the department level. What I put in chat is that you had mentioned the market intelligence tools, and we explore that realm quite a bit ourselves, trying to make sure that we either latch onto or even propose tools that might help with these kinds of things. The sooner you can let us know what you plan to use, the better, because then we can at least revector defense organizations to be using the same thing instead of paying 15 times for 15 tools, which I think we're doing times 10 right now. And so that's one piece. And then also just let us know, I think this goes into Trisha's question next too, is how can we help you and the PTAX and the small business representatives kind of push out opportunities and capabilities better?
Yeah, so I'll talk, the first question is I think a little bit easier for me. I'll have to read that a little bit of the second one. But look, so we actually have these tools. I'm gonna, open up the kimono a little bit here. So we actually have the tools and we've already developed them. But what happened was they were left on the shelf over the past couple of years before I was here. And you know what happens to tech when you don't update and refresh it? Code becomes deprecated and security patches need to be updated and all that kind of stuff. So we're working on doing that now so we can get them live again. And they're already behind the DoD firewall. And what they do is a few things. One is they allow for you, this is from a very small business professional perspective, to manage your small business performance. So, hey, I have a 5% goal. Where am I today in terms of meeting that goal? That's like the most basic functionality of it. The things that I'm more excited about that they do is, one, it allows you to do comparative analytics between buying activities within DoD. So if I'm buying, I don't know, AI technology, just as an example, and I'm looking for who maybe the Navy buys from, I can actually use this tool to look at their performance, their vendors, their contracts, and then say, hey, well, if they're doing that, what are the best practices that I can use to mimic what they're doing, for example, or vice versa. We call that the maximum practicable opportunity tool. And then we actually have a market research tool, because what happens is our workforce, as you know, when they're preparing for a requirement, they have to do market research. And right now, there's not really an automated Expedia style way to do that. But what this tool will do, it will allow a customer or anybody really in the government to put in their requirements through an Expedia style checklist. I'm just using that as like the most basic way of describing it. And it will help walk them through what the steps are to creating a market research report for their requirement. And they will see a list of capable companies that could do, yeah, Zillow's cool. I'm good with that. It'll give them a list of companies based on FPDS data, and we're going to bring in some commercial data that could be possible performers, again, to like help increase the set asides and to help with that. So I think we're probably, I don't know, 3 to 6 months away from going live on those tools. And yeah, I think it'd be great to just leverage what we're already doing. And it'd be great to have an offline conversation with what you guys are thinking and see how we can make it work together. On the second question, maybe you might have to repeat that one for me now.
Just,
Hi.
yeah, Trish, go ahead to yours.
Yeah, so I was at an event this week with Arvice Johnson, the deputy at the Navy Small Business Office. And she was talking about one of the most effective techniques that they use to really get this cooking was to identify people in program management that are not necessarily small business or diversity and inclusion people, and kind of pinned the rose on them and said, you are responsible for reporting in 6 months the percentage, like if you've met our target goal for inclusion of small business and minority owned businesses or not. So they really put the onus on the people that were kind of responsible for, like letting contracts and getting small business in the door and lowering those barriers to entry and the source selection boards. She kind of said that they moved the responsibility for that inclusion out of a diversity inclusion office and into a program manager's job jar. So I'm wondering, one, if that kind of has taken hold across the DoD as a first question. And then second, like how might we at Ensign that are dealing with small companies that are formed out of our company, out of our programs, how might we serve to on-ramp them into the small business administration work that you're doing?
Yeah, so good question. So for your first question, yeah, actually department-wide, we've had this for about 8 or 9 years now. We have small business as a mandatory performance element for any senior executive that oversees acquisition. And there's a qualitative piece to it and a quantitative piece to it. And the quantitative piece is meeting the 5 goals that we have, the prime plus the socioeconomic goals. And the qualitative piece is the outreach, the engagement, the culture in their organizations. I think that's been really, really effective. I mean, the bad news is that our industrial base has shrunk. The good news is that we've met our goal 8 years in a row, which is historic for DoD. So now the question is, how do we take those best practices and help grow the supply chain instead of spending a lot of money on a few businesses, right? But I think we have the right policy infrastructure there, and our small business strategy will get at how we can make some enhancements there. I think from an Ensign perspective, one of the things that we're thinking about as part of our DoD-wide response to the White House's equity executive order is, how do we establish baselines in all of our programs, like an Ensign or like a Mantech or like an SBIR? I'm sorry, I have some work in the house, and if you hear some drilling, then I apologize. So we want to, I think one thing we can do is to figure out what is the baseline in these different programs in terms of events, things like this, in terms of your hackathons and pitch days and things like that you do. And then how can we take the participants of that and create this feeder system into either mentor protege or to a PTAC? But we've got to build that connectivity. I think you guys are at the ground level on the folks that you're working with. So the work you do is really important, but we have to connect it to everything else so we can pull those entrepreneurs or those companies up. As we roll out the small business strategy, I don't want to get too far ahead of it because it still needs to be signed off by all the secretary and the deputy secretary. I think there will be some mechanisms to do that better. So I'm looking forward to how we can do that together.
Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Andrew.
All right, thank you, Trish. Thank you for being here. It's really cool that we at Ensign have exposure to talk to someone at your level. I've been going to a lot of different events we've had. I've been here about a year now, and I hear a lot of different theories about, pontificating on how we can reform acquisitions. One idea that's really stood out to me is kind of making market research an iterative process. So I know when there's a new contract, you do market research, rule of 2, to find a small business for new work. But then after that's locked in, it'll probably be that prime for, let's say, another 5 years or whenever the recompete is, which really isn't at the speed of technology. So I was wondering if at your level, there's discussions about potentially onboarding new businesses, specifically small businesses, with existing contracts that could have new technology and making that process easier.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So there is some conversations around that, not exactly the way you framed it, but the problem that you framed is correct. One of the things that we're looking at from an interagency perspective is, how do we better define a new entrant? And then how do we set up incentives to bring new entrants into the industrial base? I think it's a little tricky because one is, if you want to, generally we say our new entrants are going down, but it depends on how you define it. I've seen definitions where it's like, yeah, I haven't had a DoD contract for the last 5 years. If you use that as the definition, it's pretty flat at DoD. If you say I haven't had a new contract in the last 3 years, then you see a pretty steep decline. So the definition is going to be important, and that's something that the administration is thinking about. Another piece of that is, and this is Farooq's view, how do we not punish successful businesses? I mean, on the one hand, we want to increase new entrants, and we want to grow that number in the supply chain of diverse small companies. But I'm afraid of us, if we swing too far in the other direction, there may be a company that should get the work again, right? An incumbent, maybe they're very good. So the key in my mind is, how do we create some incentives without swaying too far to punishing successful companies, for the lack of a better way of saying it. And that's going to require a lot of thinking, which we're doing right now. But the other piece of it is just competition. Hey, if there's a great incumbent, we're all for it, but they have to compete. And you got to open up the aperture to have them compete with others that may have better and more innovative ideas or technology. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but there is some thinking around that. There's just not I can't give you a silver bullet answer of what we've kind of concluded on right now.
Right. No, that helps. I guess I was more thinking about not necessarily replacing the incumbent, but incentivizing the incumbent to onboard new technologies in the course of their.
Oh, okay. Got it. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a whole nother thing. I mean, I've been really thinking about how, especially for the large primes, I think for the smaller companies, that's probably easier right now because smaller companies are more agile, they're more innovative in general. I think one of the questions in my mind is how do we encourage the large companies to do that? And how do we encourage them to transition SIBRs and things like that into their own supply chains?
Right.
And that's going to take a lot of, I mean, yeah, there are a lot of conversations around. One thing that you may want to check out, actually, which we'll touch a little bit on this when it goes public, is the Defense Business Board is wrapping up a study on the mentor protege program. I think it'll be released in March. And that's something that I dug into with them was how do we encourage the large primes to pull in the companies that are coming out of MPP or having their own mentor protege program. So there's a lot of thinking around that. And I think that's something that we need to address.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I have a question from John Rivnak. He's our private capital manager here at Ensign. John, did you want to ask it or I can read it?
Nope, I can ask it.
Awesome.
Hey, Farooq, nice to meet you. Thanks for being here, John Rivnak. Venture and private investment has traditionally been much lower for minority-owned and women-owned business. And I don't have data to back this up, but I suspect that that's even more true for small businesses selling into Department of Defense. So I was wondering if your office is, how your office is thinking about that, and if it has any specific programs or initiatives focused on helping to incentivize more private and venture investment in those minority-owned and women-owned businesses.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to say yes and no. The no part of it is that we haven't dug deep enough to get to the minority and women-owned private investment piece yet. The yes part of it is, and I definitely want to speak with you or others at Ensign about this offline, but my office is really doing a review of what is the trusted capital marketplace, which you may be familiar with. And I'm really taking a close look at how across DoD we can come up with a more comprehensive strategy about how we're working with venture and private equity capital providers. There's issues there around due diligence of small companies, due diligence of the private equity. How are we doing that? What's the rubric? Are we doing it consistently? What can we do and what can't we do from a policy perspective? So that's kind of where I'm at right now, is just to figuring that out. And I've had a lot of great meetings with AFWorks, with NSIC, who's I guess closely related to you guys, with DCSA. So I'm kind of in this fact-finding mode of working with all the different stakeholders that are in this space, and Ensign is a group that I need to probably talk to about it, and really getting us all using the convening power of OSD, I would say, to get us all aligned on how do we best do this and do it in a secure way for both the company and for the customer. And then I think the next step for that is what incentives can we create to reach these other companies. But I'm probably at like an earlier step in terms of the process that I'm at right now, if that makes sense.
Great, thanks. I appreciate it. And yeah, looking forward to working with you on all of that.
Yeah, definitely are. Thanks, John, for that question. There's another question that we have here from Sugeesh Krishnan. If you wanted to jump in and ask your question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the overview here. So I think you started to talk about the transition process, and I'm just curious if you guys have any resources or tools that you help support small businesses as they sort of go across that SBIR, STTR valley of death. And so, just curious what they are. And so specifically, as we look at sort of programs like AFWorks's StratFi, TACFi programs. Again, are there resources that you all provide to support small businesses as they go through that process?
Yeah, actually, I just had my first meeting with the AFWorks folks, and that's kind of stems back a little bit to the conversation I had with them about the question that was just asked by John, I think. Look, there's a lot of tools in DoD to support small businesses from the Valley of Death. The Mentor Protege program is one of them, depending on where a small company may be at on the spectrum. But there are other programs that I think we, as part of our small business strategy, I'm recommending that we look back and explore funding. For example, the Rapid Innovation Fund is an authority that was specifically created to support phase 3 awards to help bridge that gap between a procurement contract and the time when a CBIR contract may end. There's also a couple of other new programs if we ever get a budget and if we ever get out of this continuing resolution, where I think we've really put some thought into how we can have other programs that support efforts like that. Look, I don't think there's a silver bullet to it. We can't just say we're going to use this one thing and that's going to bridge the Valley of Death. We need a suite of tools. I think Mentor Protege is one, RIF is one. There's a couple of other projects that are priorities for the deputy, or programs that are a priority for the deputy. We need to really have a toolkit, and we need all these tools to be working together and in sync. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is if you've won a CBIR, we need to make sure, if it's in the manufacturing space, for example, that you're connected to the Mantech program because they have money to further development of manufacturing technologies. Or if you've won a CBIR, but you need more technical developmental business assistance, you should go to Mentor Protege. So we have a lot of different ways of doing this, but those pathways are not easy to understand for industry, which is what we want to try to do through our small business strategy, and have some real simple ways to guide companies on how to do that better. I think Air Force has done a good job of that actually with one of their efforts. I forgot what it's called, but they've got this kind of intake effort. And I'm really looking closely at that to see how that could be scaled or replicated for a broader customer base.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Because I do have a question that I had sent to you earlier. So since I don't see any in the queue, I'll go ahead and ask. So when we consider topics like coastal resilience, the government is interested in making disadvantaged businesses and disadvantaged socioeconomic populations more resilient. And it's not just combating soil erosion. Evidence of this is everywhere right now, from USAID to EPA to the bipartisan infrastructure law. How do you help small businesses track these trends from a global perspective to save time, and global as in the entirety of the federal policy and contracting space?
Yeah, I don't think we really do that right now, to be honest. I mean, I think what you're referring to is like, how does a small company gain the knowledge and understanding of the policies, the priorities around certain topics like that? Is that?
So yes, and then helping them, and I guess you talked about this a little bit in the tools that you do provide currently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, I think one of the things this is a good point actually, and I think it's hard. We just as an example, we just did these massive category management reforms that I just talked about a little earlier, which I didn't get too in the weeds in because it's really wonky. But small companies, how would they even know about that, right? Like there's an OMB memo that went out and it told the workforce to go make all these changes. But if you're an average, small, disadvantaged business, you wouldn't know what that means or how that helps you, right? I think this is, am I right? This is kind of in the same spirit of like, how do we communicate better with them? I think for me, and I haven't really thought this through a lot. It's a good question though. I think this is where we have to leverage the P-tax better as one mechanism. I mean, we're literally funding 95 centers across the country. And I want small businesses to be beating down their door for help, and for them to be knocking on the small business doors and saying, hey, here's what we have to offer. And some of that, what they have to offer should be the latest and greatest priorities, or the latest and greatest information on what policies we're putting out and things like that. Right. So I think that's one mechanism we can think about doing something like that with. But look, in order for companies to be beating down their doors, they have to be doing good work, right? So I'm taking a fresh look at what the PTACs are doing and making sure they're more in line with the things that we've talked about today, including what you just mentioned. But I think that's an easy way to get a mass message out, you know.
Got it. Any other questions that we have from everyone?
And yeah, what
Before-
Andrew put in the chat is what I was referring to, Air Force Tech Connect. Thanks for
Okay.
that.
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, hey Karen, this is Chris Vodiatis. I do have a question.
Awesome.
In terms of small business goals, whose responsibility is that? Is that the Small Business Administration? Is it, you know, the PEO or PM, or is it the actual contracting office?
All of the above.
Right.
I'll tell you how it works. So in the Small Business Act, Congress has set goals for the overall prime contracting goal and the socioeconomic groups. Actually, statutorily, and I just learned that this last year, that is a minimum goal. So actually the president, through a executive order, or in this case through an OMB memo, could increase those goals if the administration wants, which is what we did for the small disadvantaged business goal for this year. SBA is then responsible for, the Small Business Administration is responsible for negotiating goals with every federal agency that will cumulatively lead up to that overarching goal that we have. So the federal wide prime contracting goal, as an example, is 23%. The DoD share of that this year is 22.5%. So as long as everyone meets the goals that SBA negotiates with them, then we're all good. Now, what I do in my office is then I go to every service and defense agency and I give them goals that cumulatively would help us get to 22.5. So let's say Army's goal is whatever. I don't know what it is right now off the top of my head. Let's say it's 25%. I think it's higher than that. Army will then go and negotiate goals with all of their commands and make sure that their commands are meeting those goals to get to Army's goal. So it really like starts with the administration and SBA, but then it goes to the agency within DoD, because we're so massive. Then I negotiate goals, everyone else negotiates goals, and it ends up being that all these people are responsible for it, which is what we want, right? Like we don't want the small business guy to be responsible for meeting every single goal, because it just wouldn't happen. So we've really built this in a way where it goes down to the PEO, the KO, you know, the small business director. They're all working together on this every day.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And then a follow-up. So I used to be a contracting officer. So I am familiar with the goals and the importance and the emphasis on them. But I always wondered who's accountable. You know, if we got a yellow instead of a green that year, you know, when you looked at our numbers, is it the contracting folks that are accountable because we didn't steer our PEOs in the right direction, or is it the SBA because they didn't pay close enough attention to the whatever that form, the small business form, you know?
Well, look, I did mention earlier that senior executives in DoD have that mandatory performance element. But look, let's be real. Let's be real, man. Like no one's ever gotten fired for missing a small business goal, right? So for me, approaching this from the perspective of goals, and for me to be like the ombudsman of achieving goals is a recipe for, it's a losing game plan, right?
Sure.
So my thinking around this has always been, we need to show our leaders, our warfighters, and our acquisition professionals the capability that these companies bring, right? Like, how do they contribute to the mission? And now over the last, I mean, you guys have a lot of successes from Ensign, from some of the work you've done. And now people are coming to Ensign with their problems and they're saying, hey, I've got this problem. Can you do a convening around it? That's what we want. We want them to see the value in it. And then they're going to be like, oh, wow, this is great. Like, we actually want more of this. I'll tell you, like 10 years ago when I was in this office, the chatter that you hear now pro small business, it wasn't the same. It just wasn't. So we worked really hard at changing the culture and putting the right best practices in place. If you do that, the goal meets itself because everybody wants to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I would add, if you're following the rules of the FAR, then do you have a tough time not, hitting your goals too?
Well, that's, yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's why this whole thing about, I think there's a ripe area with the rule of two stuff, but also under the simplified acquisition threshold. In the past, we used to provide or assign goals for the services for their SAT spend. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's basically procurements under $250,000 have far more simplified procedures, but it's required, I think, in the FAR that they are mandatorily set aside for small businesses unless there are some exceptions. But we're not doing that to the fullest extent that we can. And that's where I think the Ensign type programs come in, because some of these companies that come out of your events, they don't need a $5 million contract. There's things they can do to start at a much lower dollar value, and we should be making it easy to get to them, right?
Yeah. And we do engage almost exclusively with small businesses. I don't think there's any rules against new entrants being large businesses, but primarily, they all meet the definition of a small business. And with that in mind, has there ever been a conversation, and I know you guys are the Office of Small Business Programs, but a consideration of non-traditionals in addition to or in a supplement or some sort of replacement to just strictly focus on small business, but those that meet the definition of non-traditional defense contractors?
Yeah, I mean, I view that as within my purview for sure. I mean, it's not, non-traditionals are not always small, but they're usually small, right?
Right.
One of the interesting things that I've learned though is when we award a prototype OT, especially through a consortium, that's not even tracked right now towards our small business spend, because there's not a policy around how to do it. I think we might need an FPDS field or something like that. I mean, I really want to get at that because I think we're not even capturing billions of dollars of spend going to small companies. But again, like, it's not like that's an easy, I can't flip a switch and do that. I got to work with, with an ANS and with SBA and this and that. It's something that I think is important to do though.
It sure is, yeah. Ironically enough, I worked at Army Contract Command in New Jersey. We were probably a big part of that headache of why you couldn't collect consortium OTA data. The last 2 years I was there, we spent working with, like DASA offices, trying to figure out how to correct the CAR or create an alternative reporting method for consortium awards, which resulted in a spreadsheet that had like 52 columns of data that we had to put in per award, which was very cumbersome.
Yeah, so we got to figure it out. I mean, it's definitely, it is a priority of mine to do that, but unfortunately I haven't gotten around to it, but it's important.
Thanks for your responses. I won't take up any more of the group's time. Thank you.
No worries.
It's fine. Opening it for more questions. While I wait, I do have one. So could you talk a little bit about the Buy America program and how it impacts government procurement, especially for the smalls who may have the challenge of building the right supply chains?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting executive order with an interesting implementation, and it scales up the domestic input percentage over time to be, I think, up to 79%, if I'm not mistaken. What I like about it though is that we're being transparent and we're actually publicly posting the waivers that we're granting to Buy America. I think that's really important because I have the data and strongly believe that we have domestic industrial capability to meet many of our requirements. And I think one mechanism of finding it and showing industry a signal as to what we want is to say, hey, here's a waiver that we granted. And then for somebody to come out from wherever and say, hey, I actually do that. We shouldn't be granting a waiver for it because I can do it. And I think over time, I'm hoping that process leads to more companies either coming out and saying, hey, we actually do that, or saying, I can do it. All I need to do is revector my, machine shop this way and I can produce this product. Right. So I think that's kind of the way I'm thinking about that.
Thank you. Any other questions from this group? It's really good to have you here and have that direct, Q&A session.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to do it anytime.
Really appreciate it. Are there any other questions from anyone on the panel of people we have here in front of me. All right, I may have another one because I did send you some before. So with the current state of events that are happening really rapidly, and they will have an impact on manufacturing, applied research, innovative programs. There's no telling where the impact will end. How do small businesses best plan for the DoD's current and future needs?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, that's a good question. I think, well, there's a couple of things. One is, I think from a readiness perspective, you may have seen, or maybe you didn't, CISA put out some really good guidance on protecting your networks. And then we, Karen, my office can send you a glossy one pager that we did, like amplifying that, but also including the resources that we have. I think it's really important for small businesses to be protected from a cyber perspective. And again, there's many resources out there. We've got some and others have others. I think that's really important. I also think just from an overall readiness, or sorry, the future kind of needs perspective, I mean, there's a lot of work happening around some of our manufacturing programs like Mantech. I think getting involved in our manufacturing innovation institutes that we've invested heavily in for companies is a really good thing to do. We've got 9 of them, and it gives you a signal of the types of technologies we're going to be focusing on in the future. I think even looking at the cyber solicitations for topics in certain areas just give you a sense as to like where DoD's headed, right? So I think that kind of thing is just off the top of my head what I can think of.
Great. Thank you so much for that. We are 6 minutes out, which I will gladly give back to everyone here if there are no more questions. And please do send over the glossy. I would love to be able to share that. I do appreciate your time today. One last call for questions. All right, that is, oh, Emily, please go.
No, that wasn't a question. I was just clapping.
Oh, all right. Yes, I applaud this session as well. Thank you so much for your time. This is recorded. So if anyone does want to see the replay of this, we will be posting that very soon. We also do have a YouTube channel and that can go on there as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time today. And Farooq, really, thank you. That means a lot for you to be here.
Yeah, no, glad to do it. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.